we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
So one of the most popular Instagram accounts out there dealing with law enforcement that gets sent to me quite a bit, and people say, hey, are you checking out this account? Are you following this account? And half the time I have to be like, yeah, I repost quite a bit from it. But the cool thing is, like, you and I have been able to work this into a schedule, and talk. And for those listening and those watching, I'm with JT, who has Survive Policing Instagram account. And we'll get into some other stuff that he and I are into, and definitely his background in law enforcement, why he knows the things that he knows, how he can capture the collective thoughts of most hard chargers out there in Copland, and then post it in a way that just catches the eye. And it's simple and it's basic, but damn, it hits the point. So, dude, I appreciate your time. I want to jump right into it, and right off the bat, tell us about how Survive Policing Instagram account even started.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm happy to be here again. We've had plenty of conversations, but the first time like this, so I'm super excited. Yeah, so JT spent 14 years in law enforcement. Started on the military side, transitioned out into the civilian side. Started as patrol officer, spent a few years as an FTO. Went to a street crimes unit for about 3 years, doing all proactive type of work. And then spent a few years on a plainclothes specialized unit doing case enhancement, covert surveillance, a lot of tracking down wanted suspects, stuff like that. And then ended up transitioning into the corporate sector back in 2021. And at the same time had been going through a lot of like personal challenges too. A lot of different things happened. Obviously, at that time, we were coming off of COVID. George Floyd had just happened. And so I found myself kind of in this period where I'm transitioning out of law enforcement, kind of finding, going into my next chapter, having personal challenges, but also the challenges of like figuring out that process, getting into a new industry, trying to figure it out. Made a lot of mistakes, but had a lot of success. And kind of at the same time, ironically, I had been playing with learning like marketing and sales and stuff like that. I've always been into business and entrepreneurship ever since I was a kid. And it was just one of those things. I have to be learning something, doing something, just to keep myself busy. So I was actually just trying to learn more about social media. I was never one really on social media, never had a Facebook account. And I said, man, like I'm learning some of the social media stuff, some of this marketing stuff. I was like, I better figure out how this Instagram thing works. And I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? And law enforcement was the one thing I'm probably most passionate about, and probably know the best out of anything. So let me start this page. And honestly, like the name, it just kind of was one of those things I just thought of, didn't really, kind of came to me, thought it kind of sounded like popped a little bit, and was like, okay, like kind of captures at that point in time what the essence of what I wanted to kind of talk about was, which was, surviving your career, but also, hey, after your career's done, like, how do you figure that out? And then, started the page. And honestly, for the first probably year or two, it grew really slowly, but I just kept at it and was sharing a lot about, like, again, like the transition I was making. So going into the corporate sector, really trying to figure that out, kind of seeing things that like I didn't expect to see, but also, okay, like these are definitely lessons that, especially at that time, like I knew there was going to be a lot of police officers that were either leaving or probably going to leave their agency just because of everything that had happened over the last few years during that time. Just thinking, man, like this is stuff that I wish I knew when I got out. Right. Mm-hmm. So I was talking a lot about that, and actually what happened was I just started kind of sharing more like personal stories, experiences, stuff like that. And my passion has always been like the street work, investigations, mm-hmm. Proactive policing. And at the time, I kind of felt honestly that a lot of people weren't even doing that work anymore. They were either scared to, not interested in it, whatever it was. Like a lot of guys really weren't, and probably still to this day, I think that's in a lot of cases, a lot of agencies, that's still the case. But I was getting a lot of like DMs and just asking questions about like my experiences, or hey, like what should I do here? What do you think about this? And just slowly started realizing like people were actually interested in that stuff, and they were seeking out answers to questions that they weren't getting answers either in their own agency or the people they were working with. So it's a topic I love talking about, and just kind of started sharing more about that. And then that ended up kind of transitioning into, you know, putting training curriculum together. And then at some point, actually got in contact with the team at Police Post, which is, I think, still the largest, at least Instagram page for law enforcement. One of the largest social media pages, period, I think. Started doing work with them, you know, doing body cam breakdowns and stuff like that. And then about a year ago, I actually transitioned out fully from the corporate sector, with Police Post and Survive Policing full time now. And yeah, it's pretty crazy actually. It grew. I knew, thinking back, I knew that there was something that because I was passionate about certain things, and there's certain themes and topics that I'm super passionate about that in some cases kind of go against the grain, I guess. I knew that it was it would resonate with some people. I didn't know it would resonate with as many people as it has. I think, you know, Survive, you know, almost, I think, 57,000 followers. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's been a crazy experience. I've connected with cops from all over the world, literally, and probably thousands at this point. And again, it's pretty wild because, again, I'm just like anyone else, just a normal guy that kind of had a passion. Started a page, started talking about it, resonated with people. And, you know, I'm sure you have the same feeling sometimes too, where it's like, you're thinking like people are coming, you know, and I appreciate kind of that, having, I guess, earned that, that respect from people, based on the things I've shared, that they feel the need to come to me and ask me questions and stuff. But yeah, it's been a kind of a passion project that's kind of turned into a, you know, full-time business now.
Well, it's great in that sense that, like, especially around that time. And I think probably now we're starting to kind of see it trend out for a lot of cities, and jurisdictions of, okay, it's okay to be proactive again. But when you mentioned that earlier, I remember that time, and to me, it was alarming because I heard actual hard chargers saying, "Hey, it's over with. It's done.
Yeah.
Like we're not doing the work we used to do, and we're almost being told, don't go do that." You know what I mean? And you're right, and that trend was going on. And so what ends up happening, like anything, if you want to destroy an enemy organization, destroy the morale from within. And that, I mean, sadly, that was the phenomenon that was happening. People were feeding off of one another the way we always do.
Yeah.
But so it's like, if you're on the team and everybody's positive and we're running and gunning and doing surveillance and all this stuff, you feed off of it, and it just increases, and the productivity is better and more rewarding, and the community safer. But then if some of those key players start to get negative, then everybody else starts to come down. And sadly, those weak leaders at the top that are so afraid of being the next CNN news story, they love that. They love to see everyone sitting in a parking lot and not doing anything.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that at that at that time, as your account was really taking off, and people were seeing it and reposting things, and like I said, you know, sharing it with me, and I'm like, yeah, hey, I'm following the account, like yes, that like basically stay in the fight. Like we're still all out there. Everybody is still of the like mind. You just have to swim upstream right now. And I know for a lot of people, you know, and you've gotten plenty of messages where people have probably sent stuff and said, hey, I can't even do the work that I used to do because I'm afraid I'm going to get indicted.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, okay, well, change departments if you need to, you know, like still be a cop if that's where your heart is, but maybe leave that jurisdiction or leave that department if that history is there where they've proven to you, we are not going to take care of you. But I love that when you post things, and this is the cool thing too, also like ego free. So I love like talking to you because one of the things I thought about was like, this dude's got to be very much like me and just laid back, but really enjoys police work and really good at what he's good at. And there's no like over the top ego or like, here I am, I'm JT and I'm doing police work and no one else is as good as me. I don't know. I love that. Like when we were talking, it was like, yeah, like this dude would be on my team or vice versa. I would be on your team in a department. You quickly realize so many people share those characteristics across the country, and it's almost 100% accurate. And then you see the loudmouths out there, and you're like, okay, like that person's a little bit of like over the topness or whatever, and they really don't have the knowledge that I need or even the proper motivation. So
no, I think like certainly like, and it was one of the things that I was kind of hesitant about at first and really for a long time about like sharing, my experiences or whatever, because I'm not that type of person that like boasts about successes, accomplishments, and stuff like that. I kind of see myself, I was a above average police officer, and mostly just because I was really passionate about it. I enjoyed like the police work. I don't have any extraordinary skills. I just really enjoyed it. And I was fortunate that I worked in busy areas where I learned a lot, and I never got stuck in like a slump where, I saw a lot of guys, and it's something I've talked about quite a bit, which is like you see guys, they get off field training, maybe they get in a year and they just they start, taking it easy, and they spend more days in the parking lot and going out there making stops. And I just always had the drive of like trying to be better and honestly like as good as some of the other officers that I saw that were like, I was thinking like, how are they making those arrests? Like, what are they doing different? Like just trying to learn. And then, just never stopping and just trying to learn. And then being around, I mean, I was on some really good teams. When I was working plainclothes, the team I was a part of had a really immense amount of experience. I was the least experienced on the team. So being in that environment, like I couldn't help but just soak up the information that those guys had. And that to me was like, and even when people talk about my experiences, like I just was fortunate to really be around people that were a hell of a lot better than me and had a lot more experience than me in a lot of cases. And so I just try to share those lessons. But yeah, I mean, one of the things like you talked about is it's always been the balance with, especially with what I try to put out there, just in terms of it's information or motivation or just kind of like real talk, because there is that brutal side of the job. And I think one of the things that I set out to do was to share those things that I felt that particularly like, leadership would try to like hide from you and or sugarcoat or just blatantly lie about. The agency will take care of you and stuff like that. Like that's a good thing to say, but it's in a lot of cases it's not true. And my whole thing was just for me personally, like I can take the like whatever the hard difficult thing is about the job, like whatever hard pill there is to swallow, like I'm fine with that, but at least give me the truth about it. You know what I mean? Let me make that decision and have that autonomy to be able to make the decision for me and my family. And I think every cop deserves that. So that was the balance that I tried to and still try to kind of meet, which is because I would get a lot of questions and be like, hey, like on one hand, you're saying like the leadership this and, the job will do this to you. And like, these are the sacrifices you'll make. But on the other hand, you're telling people to go out and like do proactive work. And my thing is, look, if you're going to be a police officer and not go out and be proactive and actually do the police work, I don't know what the point is, to be honest with you. That's just me personally. I wouldn't have gotten into the job if it was to like just avoid doing the work, because to me, that's taking all the fun and all the fulfillment out of it. And again, that's just my personal opinion about it. I think there's a lot of people that maybe have never even been able to feel that because they haven't been able to work. And again, fast forward to now, I think you also are, as you talked about, kind of seeing that switch kind of go back to where like guys are interested in doing work. You're also having people that have just got into the job in the last 2 or 3 years where they didn't experience, the George Floyds and the Freddie Grays and the Michael Browns. Same thing when, I wasn't around when Rodney King happened, right? So I'm sure that's it's always cyclical, but you have guys now that are getting into the job and maybe they haven't experienced the worst sides of the job, but they're getting out there and they want to do the work. And I think the unfortunate thing as we I think we could have all predicted back in, 5 years ago, which was when every day that you stop doing the work and you slow down the work and you push guys with that experience out of units or out of the agencies themselves, like that information is not being captured and shared with the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that big training and knowledge gap to where, how do you fill it? And I just tried to, when I started getting questions and people asking me my opinions or my thoughts on different cases, like, hey, I'm going to share with you my experiences and hopefully it helps you, go about your day. And obviously there is a gap there because, we know like every agency is different when it comes to training and how many people again, like if you come from an agency of 100 people, maybe 10% of those people have had good experiences or they've done the work and they even have the knowledge to share. In that case, like it's not even a matter of people not wanting to share the knowledge, it's just there's not that knowledge there to share. So there's a lot of things to kind of combat. Like law enforcement's unique and just the fact that there's so many agencies, but they're so different, right? Like that, you have small agencies, you have big agencies, you have a lot in the middle. There's no like one size fits all solution for any of them. And so it is up to us personally as police officers to like go out and find that information that we're looking for in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest, at least not learning curve, but the biggest thing for me to understand in my career, because early on, probably my first 4 or 5 years, there wasn't necessarily such a flooded market. Well, actually, the market's not even flooded, but people willing to teach lessons.
Yeah.
What was going on at that time were very outdated packaged courses you could take. And I can remember guys going and taking these courses and coming back and then being like, well, it was okay, but it was a lot of like story time and really I don't even know how to apply necessarily what the guy taught, So that was like, one of the things that I saw was like, when I joined the department, I fully expected like there to be units that, were ingrained in intel working sources and informants, all this like really cool units. And there were, but a lot of those guys lack knowledge.
Yeah.
That was like one of the things where I was getting frustrated going, I want to walk into a room as a first year officer and I want someone to teach me everything I need to know about either this geographical area or the criminal element that's operating here or there, like, full blown briefings with detail. And I don't know, I had very high expectations.
Yeah.
And they were not always met. And then it was like, probably about my 4th or 5th year in, started seeing that there were courses you would have to travel. And so then you're paying out of pocket and everything wasn't virtual at the time. So there's almost like this perfect time right now of being an officer or deputy or whatever agent, and you're wanting to get into really cool proactive units that are now, going to be the flavor of the day in these departments.
Yeah.
And now there's like online training. There are people that kind of like yourself, you've transitioned out of police work. You're now available a lot more than you probably would have been, obviously, if you're working schedules and stuff, sharing those experiences, creating training, and allowing officers and agents and deputies to ask you legit questions, and then you answer them honestly, because you have like you're not a chief or a captain or something that's going to sugarcoat it or sadly manipulate officers or lower ranking. But I do like that. So the fact that you were able to transition out, but you work these units, gathered this knowledge, but now are able to also teach courses and share that information with people.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the interesting thing was when I did go to the corporate sector, I was still doing like investigations, and it was actually really interesting work. It was more on like the theft and fraud side. It went from everything from like the supply chain to internal investigations, with personnel. And a lot of the same skills apply, right? Like interviewing and interrogation, like it's the same type of stuff. Whether you're investigating a criminal incident or a human resources, situation, right? A lot of it's just dealing with people. One of my strengths has always kind of been like being able to deal with people, or at least having a pretty strong like perception of like how to deal with situations, or at least assess what a situation looks like when it comes to people. I grew up in a very like around a lot of diverse people, diverse situations. So I just kind of learned to adapt from there, and then just applied that to police work. And so some of those things that like whether you're in law enforcement or out of law enforcement, those skills still apply. And one of the most interesting topics for me was always just human behavior. So, and it was one of those things that like I didn't really get taught a lot about in whether it's police academy or field training or whatever it is. And I was kind of sitting there as a patrol officer and thinking kind of like you, like, man, I really wish I could like, I want to know more about this. And the big thing was like the behaviors that you see, whether it's, you know, where they're doing like interdiction work, proactive policing, just going out there and trying to figure out, hey, like, how do I differentiate between this person that is might have something in their cars committing a crime and the people that aren't, right? And it wasn't something that was really taught. I was fortunate. I did get to go to, I sought out and was able to go to quite a few training courses early in my career. But again, even back then, it was very interdiction heavy in terms of like highway interdiction, stuff like that. A lot of use of like canines and, you know, maybe some intel, but not a lot in like an urban environment. Right. And now a lot of the skills kind of overlap, but there's a difference between working like an interstate. That's you know, I-95 that goes from Baltimore to, you know, at least for this area, Baltimore to, you know, New York City and back and forth, and Philadelphia and stuff like that, and working the more urban areas where you're trying to do the same type of work, but like you're not working the interstate. And so I just kind of sought out as much information as possible. I know we just talked about before we hopped on about books, and I started reading books. I mean, one of the first ones I found that I actually found pretty applicable was called Left of Bang, which is probably a pretty well known within law enforcement and military. And it's actually it's actually based on the teachings of a guy named Gray Williams. And I actually have, this is a textbook that he wrote, which I would highly encourage people to look into. But basically it was the premise was based off of the Marine Corps Combat Hunter Program, which dealt with, hey, like, how do we avoid getting, you know, setting ourselves up and being in the middle of the bang when the bang happens. And a lot of this work was done when overseas during the war, trying to avoid just IEDs, right? So you know, how do we detect someone that's planning an IED, right? How do we identify it before we roll up on it and get blown up? So stuff like that. And again, that wasn't law enforcement specific, but I started reading books like that and trying to figure out, how do I apply this to my environment? And it's kind of like, you know, one of the things they talk a lot about is like establishing the baseline of your environment. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm out here on patrol every day. What's my baseline? Like, what's my environment like? So I just start going out every day and just paying attention to things like, where do people hang out? Where are people concentrated throughout the day? How do they travel back and forth on foot and cars? And then how do the people that are engaged in criminal activity, how do they act differently, right? And how can I pick them out from the people that aren't? Very basic concepts, but like it's kind of complex in practice, and especially if like no one's ever taught you what that means or how to do it. And I just started reading books, trying to apply it, kind of adding kind of the principles that I learned or different things I would pick up in like these different training courses to figure out like, hey, how does, you know, what works here, what works there, and, you know, working with other guys that were like finding dope in cars and guns in cars. What were they looking for? What were the things that they were seeing prior to pulling a car over that gave them the indication that like, hey, this is a good car, we need to pull over. And then just doing the work. I mean, honestly, like when I was on the street crimes unit, I mean, we made thousands and thousands of motor vehicle stops. So with that amount of volume, you're going to pretty quickly start differentiating between the people that you think are, you know, involved in criminal activity and those that probably aren't. And so then you just start filtering like your stops and the people that you're looking at and the things you're looking for. And then just kind of, you know, build on top of that. And then just add in like the investigative side and get an opportunity like, hey, can I write a search warrant for this? Can I be part of this investigation? Can I sit in on this interview? Right. And just kind of building the foundational principles of like being a good investigator or a good street cop. And that's kind of how I learned. And now, looking back, the information I try to put out is basically what I wish I would have had at least available to me at the time. Right. it's not, it's kind of my, it's based a lot on my experiences. And one of the things that we talked about quite a bit is like developing sources.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I just kind of stumbled into that. And at the time when I was a patrol officer, I was actually pursuing my master's degree in intelligence management. So I was learning a lot about intelligence and intelligence gathering and what you do with it, and how to dissect it to get the information that's valuable and the information that's not. And a lot of that has to do with just, talking to people and getting information from human sources, right? So that was just an interest of mine. I said, okay, like I'm going to go out here and I'm going to start talking to people. If someone calls a complaint into the station, like I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to follow up on it. And I started having success with getting information from people. I think one of the first times I actually saw this in practice was we were walking. I think we were doing like a foot patrol. I don't know, late at night, and there's a group of younger guys hanging out on one of these busy corners, and we just go up to them, we start talking to them. And the one kid, I think he may have still been in high school, 17, 18 years old, maybe. I just started talking to him. And long story short, he was kind of stumbled into being involved with one of these local street gangs because he was friends with all these guys growing up. And they started getting involved in more serious crimes and things that like this kid wasn't necessarily like down with. And so he ended up coming in. We would share information back and forth. He came in, he identified, dozens of like members of this gang, nicknames, social media accounts, stuff like that, just because he was starting to feel like uncomfortable with how serious things were getting. And all that was based off of just having a conversation with this kid on the side of the road one night. And so with that, when you start seeing information that like otherwise would have never been acquired, except for like going out there and just being on foot, talking to people and trying to build that rapport with them, and then seeing that information then be used to build cases in like a shooting later on, like that's powerful stuff. And that's just what I was like, once I saw that, I was like, wow, this is cool. This is what I want to do, because you can take basically nothing and turn it into like an actual case. Again, you're not creating the case, but you're taking essentially information that otherwise would have not been acquired and turn it into like a successful case at some point down the road, or be able to give that information to a detective that like helps them solve their cases. So that stuff was just powerful. And those are kind of the principles I just try to like share with other people about, hey, this is what worked in my career. This is what I really found success with, understanding human behavior, knowing what to look for, getting a lot of experience by doing a lot of different, making a lot of stops, and then, developing sources, trying to get that information, understanding how information could be turned into intelligence later on, either by yourself or another investigator.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about the Marine Corps unit, Left to Bang book, all that. One of the first episodes I did, I had a guest on, and he was born in Kuwait. And if I remember right, his mother was Kuwaiti, his dad was American, or vice versa. But I think that's how it was. Either way, he grew up, joined the Marine Corps, and then was part of that program and was an instructor in it. And so when he was on the show, that was one of the things that, we were talking about. And I'm like, dude, this is like police work 101 for us. And that was the thing too, like the history of that course and how they put all these people in a room and brought in, cops and that sort of thing, and also debriefed them on what is it that you're looking for, like in the criminal landscape. And it's all very similar because it's a human behavior. So it's like, contraband, and like one of the terms I think he had used was atmospheric shift. And he's like, so we'll create, something for, or we'll notice an atmospheric shift, in the area we're watching it, meaning like something changes that environment, the presence of a soldier, the presence of someone else coming into that area or whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, we used to do the same thing. You're watching 4 or 5 guys posted up, you're doing surveillance, and then you call a marked patrol unit and you're like, hey, all I want you to do is ride by. And the presence of that officer in the area causes whoever's holding the contraband to do the behaviors that you're going to observe, either, blading their body away from the officer, looking instinctively at the stash spot where they've got stuff in a chip bag or in the buckle of a sidewalk or whatever. So it was interesting to hear him talking about how they were implementing it overseas and how they were identifying people positioning IEDs and stuff like that. I don't know. It's just, it's always cool whenever we can learn from different realms like that. And when you mentioned Left to Bang, there's another book, like I used to recommend it a lot, and I'd love to do some more follow up on it. But there's a book called How to Break a Terrorist. So as soon as you read the title, you're like, oh, this is about, waterboarding and enhanced interrogation. It's the opposite.
Yep.
It's an Air Force. Have you read it? Have we talked about it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's a really good book. Yeah.
It's really incredible, man. And for those listening, it's one of these it's nonfiction. It documents an Air Force interrogator who, if I remember right, had a master's degree in Middle Eastern studies, cultural studies. And all he did was apply a lot of the same techniques JT and I and others use in the streets. Like, you build rapport, the history of the area, if it's a criminal organization, their characteristics, all that stuff. But then you use that to build rapport. And so the book breaks down how he and his team of interrogators used that and started to interview insurgents that were captured, building rapport and getting, the most important thing, accurate information that they could then, give to direct action units, that sort of thing. But it's just a great example of not getting frustrated and overwhelmed at an enemy force and understanding there are different angles, and without getting into all the pros and cons of stuff. I just like that it showed those are the same techniques that I always used. And basically the techniques I used was, I would just reverse it and be like, if I'm stopped by the police, I don't want to be cussed out. I don't want, I've experienced that, so I'm not going to do that to someone else. And then, hey, I've been in internal affairs. They've interviewed me on what was BS, but also didn't like their style and how they did it. And it actually was, some experiences, they were real clumsy at their interviews. And good, if I were a criminal, I'd eat them up all day long. Like, there's no way you would get the information from me because you're so openly clumsy in this interview, or heavy-handed, or I don't know. So I was always just kind of looking at instinctively when I talk to people, what would I want to be in their shoes? That was always my thing. Was like, I want to lay out everything. Okay, these are your choices. This is your life. You pick this route, cool. You pick this route, cool. Whatever you're good with. So if it is, you're going to sit here and stonewall and, roll the dice and then potentially get, sentenced to 20 years in prison. That's on you. Hey,
one of the most, I think one of the most like powerful things, and you kind of brought this up earlier, which is it's such a strong technique, is literally explaining to someone like what's going to happen based on what they decide to do next, right? Which is, I mean, you can give a perfect example of like, you pull a car over and you need them to exit the vehicle for whatever reason. Like, you have a legal reason to ask them to exit the vehicle and they refuse to. And it's pretty simple, right? One, you want to kind of give them, you're basically psychologically, you're giving them kind of like a lane to look through, or a lens to look through of like, how do I get out of this? Right. But then you also create boundaries and barriers around that. So you say, hey, look, like, I understand you don't want to get out of the car, but like, at some point you're going to get out of the car one way or another. Right. And so go one of two ways. You can get out of the car. This is what's going to happen. Like, whatever. Or like, this is also going to happen. And you basically explain it. Hey, look, sometimes explaining it like that and giving them very clearly like what the options are and why you're doing it is all they need to say, okay, whatever, I'm going to comply, or whatever it is. Even if they don't comply in those situations, you've made it very clear what the next steps are. So when it's recorded on the body cam, when you go write a report, when you're in, on the stand in the courtroom, like, you can articulate, you can testify to the fact that, look, I laid it out very clear what was going to happen. So everything after that, that person at least has to take responsibility for their actions, because I laid it out as clear as can be, as these are the options. Here's how this is going to go. It's not up to you, but I'm going to give you the option to kind of play within these boundaries. And now it's up to you. And simple stuff like that. I think when we see so many body cams where it's like cops jump to like they're escalating things on their own, where at the end of the day, your goal is to achieve that compliance, right? Now, like preferably we don't have to like get in a fight with everyone to do that. I think there's some cops that would prefer that, but again, like that's not going to serve you well. So if the goal is to get someone in handcuffs, like how do we achieve that outcome as smoothly and as efficiently as possible? And it's simple stuff like understand. I think this goes back to like understanding like the psychological aspects of like human beings, which is sometimes people, and again, it sounds corny, but like sometimes people just want to be heard, or they want to at least understand that like when someone's screaming at you or someone's saying, hey, like you don't have the right to pull me out of the car, or you need like a search warrant, right? Like, yes, they could just be being obnoxious, or they're trying to intimidate you to like back off what you're doing. But there's also a chance that they legitimately like they're confused, they're scared, they're stressed, and they just like don't know what's going on, and they're just looking for you to like give us maybe a small explanation, and maybe just like verify the fact that like, no, you do have to step out of this car, and here's why. Like I'm not gonna debate it, but you absolutely do, and I'm gonna get you out of the car, and this is what's gonna happen. And it also, when you explain people kind of the next steps, it also conveys like your confidence in what you're doing and your competence, because you know, like, hey, this is how this is going to play out. Like, there's no other way this is going to play out. So you're going to play by these rules, or it's not going to go in your favor, right? And sometimes that's all someone needs to say. Okay, like these dudes, like they have it figured out. I guess they know what they're doing. I can try not to comply, but it's probably not going to go my way. So maybe, you know, you kind of grease the wheels a little bit to kind of get to your, again, that favorable outcome. I did want to go back. Another great example I love is the parking lot example, which is kind of going back to understanding your environment and looking for like potential threats. If you go into a parking lot, go to Walmart or wherever it is, and you're going shopping, like, most people, what they try to do is they try to park close to the store, right? Because you don't want to walk a long distance. You have your cart, and you're going to bring a lot of stuff out. You don't want to park at the back of the parking lot. Well, if you go into a parking lot, look for that car that's backed into a spot all the way at the end of the parking lot, right? Like that's what you would call, compared to the baseline or what's normal for that parking lot, like that's the anomaly. And we used to see this all the time. When you're doing surveillance, like stuff like that's super simple to spot the potential dope deal, right? Because most people at no point in time, like, are they going to pull into a parking lot back into the farthest spot away from the store? It doesn't make any sense, right? So what are they doing? A lot of times they're waiting for somebody. They're waiting for the person to either come to buy drugs or come to sell them drugs. We would see it all the time in parking lots and shopping centers, and little things like that. I think that's kind of like an example that helps get people to understand the concept, especially on a patrol level, of like what it means to kind of figure out, or at least put yourself in a position to detect people that are engaged in criminal activity against, compared to people that aren't. It's just looking for those anomalies. Like, all right, this doesn't make sense. And, you wait for the other car to pull up, and the car, the person gets out. Person A, stays in their car. Person B gets out, hops in the backseat of their car. 30 seconds later, a person gets out, hops in their car, and they depart. I mean, that's a classic dope deal, right? If you're not looking for that, or you're not paying attention to like the small detail of like, hey, this car is like sitting backed in at the edge of the parking lot, like that doesn't make any sense. You're going to miss that type of stuff. And I do think that's also kind of the value of working at some point in your career, of like in a plainclothes environment, where you see things that you're not necessarily going to see on a patrol level, because people react differently. Like you said, when the marked cruiser goes into the parking lot, they're going to react in a certain way. If they don't know you're there, they're going to act in a different way. And it's never like 100% of how that happens, how that works, because someone could just be they might, even if you're in plain clothes and you're doing surveillance and they don't know they could be so, hyped up about what they're doing that they're as stressed as they would be if a marked cruiser pulled through the lot, right? But in a lot of cases, you'll see those things occur in front of you. And it was actually, when I started working plainclothes, it was kind of surprising how often you would see like things happen to where you're almost like thinking yourself out of what's happening. Like, no way they're doing this in front of me. But but you have to get used to the fact that like, oh no, like people commit crimes in front of like people commit crimes all the time out in the open when they think the police aren't there. So when you see it as a police officer for the first time, it's like, oh, okay, this is kind of wild. Right? It's just not what I'm used to. But it all goes back to understanding human behavior and being able to assess your environment and kind of apply like those basic principles of psychology and geography, right? Atmosphere, like it's also, I love the example you gave because that was something like we've talked about this before. Like it's a tactic you can use, which is like if you're watching a group and you think they're suspicious, you maybe think like maybe they're up to something, but you've been watching them for 30 minutes. You haven't seen like anything illegal specifically. Send a marked cruiser in there and see how they react. Right? Do they kind of brush it off? Do they pay attention, but like not too hard? Or does the guy, one of the guys turns his back and stuffs something down his pants? Right? Like those are the certain indicators, like you talk about when the atmosphere changes. What are the reactions?
Yeah, the best thing to do, and I teach this in some of my classes because I can actually break it down with videos, and the lay of the land, so to speak. But we were able to identify when I was on the gang unit, we picked one intersection and it was wide open to the point. I mean, you got like 3 murders on about 100-foot stretch of a city block, but there's just 2 or 3 houses right there that they were like hives. And then there's a corner store. It's a perfect recipe for the 1980s and 90s style crack spot, in the South. And it just transitioned for another 20 years that people just held that block. But one of the things that we would notice is as we would do those techniques and those, marked unit or the patrol unit would just kind of roll through like they normally would. You could identify the scouts. So the young kids that were on bikes, that are like half a block up and they're yelling 1 time or 2 times. Cause that was the code back then and it always changes. But, they were letting them know like 1 time it just 1 officer. They see 2 officers about 2 times. That lets everybody know down there, hey, you got 2 officers you need to be on the lookout for. So you could spot a scout. There's a 13, 14-year-old on a bike or a grown man who's posted up and yelling it to let everybody know. And then of course, like we talked about, you see the other behavior. But it's one of those things that like, it's almost like once you start getting into the ability to learn everything, like you're saying, you become inquisitive as an officer and you're given all this knowledge from the senior people. It's like when you got on that unit and you started learning from them, and it's almost like it's like, how can you capture all of this and put it in the brain of a rookie in the academy? But you can't really, because the new applicant, the new hire is so overwhelmed with taking all this new information that you would almost lose it. Like, so I used to teach an entire day in our police academy, and our police academy is friggin' long. It was all in-house. And at that time they ran 2 to 3 sessions of like 30 to 40 applicants. We had a lot of turnover, but it was cool because the department was like, hey, we recognize we got an issue with gangs. You won't shut up about gangs. So here you go. You got an entire, day. Do whatever you think the recruits need to learn about gangs. So I couldn't overwhelm them, but I also had to necessarily like lay out, hey, these are all the gangs active. These are the things. And really what would catch their attention is when you would show a video and maybe it's like a parking lot shootout or whatever, and then show them, hey, but you can also watch the same video if you were doing surveillance and you pick up on the fact that person's got a pistol in their waistband, or this person's already pacing near this car. They pop the trunk and here they come out with, an SKS and they're just laying waste. But once you kind of show an officer, hey, we're not just riding around, jumping out on random people and being like, I think they were a little sketchy. It's like, no, like your brain's registering this stuff, but the more you learn to almost like move in slow motion. I guess the best way I can describe it. So like the more my knowledge grew, the more my experiences grew in encounters. And that's why I used to push, rookies on training. Like, we're going to encounter people all day long. We're going to stop cars. We're going to give verbal warnings. We're going to stop in front of this house and talk to that guy who's out there cutting his grass because he cares enough about his grass. Right across the street, they sell drugs. So we're going to stop and talk to him. So you get a taste of a normal citizen in the same area where you're going to be fighting people, foot pursuits, and your brain is going to potentially can start to make you think everyone is bad in this one block radius, when really it's the opposite. It's the dudes that are posted up at this house or these two houses. Everybody else is living, among this stuff, and they hate it. So when you can kind of balance that, and like you said, that's your baseline. You stop and talk to somebody in the front yard, and they're like, "Hey, how you doing?" Yeah, and then an hour later, you're fighting someone in their backyard. At least your experiences are okay. Not everybody here, is against me or hating the cops. And I say that for our city, even though it's so large, it was like so many people were moving to the city that were not either from the South or not even, raised in a city. So a lot of them may have been from up north in the suburbs or out Midwest or whatever. And so they were like fully overwhelmed to roll into an area where people were openly cussing them out and reminding them of their light pigment, aka being like, you cracker, and they're like, some rookies are just like, whoa, why are they calling me that? Like, well, they don't like you, but that's all right. We're going to win them over, or they're going to earn their way, into jail at some point. They're going to do something stupid. But I do want to get to, like, when you were talking about doing surveillance and in plainclothes units and street crimes units, that for the officers out there that have not experienced it yet, I kind of equate it to, you can use sports, you can use whatever, but it would be like being on a football team or pick any sport and going to practice 5 days a week, sweating, working out, but you never actually get to play the game. You never get to feel what it feels like to do what you've been training to do, or to even feel the power of the victory or win a championship. And so that was my thing with police work, was like, we're going to respond to calls on patrol. We're going to have to take reports. We're also going to try and solve that as best we can, depending on call volume and who's working. But it's pretty cool when you go and take a larceny report or a burglary report, and then you actually identify the suspect, because we do a little bit of work. We knock on some doors, we get a name, we know the repeat offenders in the area, blah, 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 and something may take 2-3 hours. Or, hey, we respond to 2 juveniles getting robbed at gunpoint, and within an hour, we've surrounded an apartment, and the juveniles that robbed them at gunpoint are in there. Hey, isn't that incredible? Like, to be on training, we just did that. And now, you're learning all of this inside of your first, 8 weeks on field training, before you rotate to north side of the city. But hey, understand, these kids at 15 and 16 that are robbing people at gunpoint with a stolen rifle. I mean, this is real life. Like, those kids aren't going to go away. Most of them are only going to get more violent. And so I had a really great rookie that one of the first calls, like right out the gate, was that. Solved it, identified it. Another patrol officer got eyes on the suspect vehicle, locked it down. I mean, it was an incredible case for a patrol officer to see the full spectrum of it and be like, no, you just responded as a patrol officer to an armed robbery. And we've identified the location. We're observing guys inside of the apartment changing clothes. They were young enough and smart enough to know, hey, we were wearing, red shirt, white shirt. Like, we got to get out of these clothes, lock it down, do our search warrants, recover the stolen rifle. That rookie went on to be an incredible intel specialist, later became a sergeant, sadly jumped ship and went to another department. But that was actually, the best route for him. But I say all that to say, how great is that as a rookie? If someone goes 2, 3, 4 years and never experiences that, and everything around them is, we hate the police, and their social media feed is all of this hate the police, and man, I don't know how people stay in it, because that was, for me, that's what I loved. I loved doing police work, getting hands on. I loved feedback from the community. Yeah, every now and then you're going to have a supervisor or someone that's not that great. Sadly, the trend is a lot more now. Up the chain is getting really watered down and so political. I do think that shift is happening here. for a lot of cities that are smart enough to get ahead of it. But I just encourage everybody listening to this, especially if you're in law enforcement or getting into law enforcement, like get your way into that. Volunteer to check in with specialized units. Get on scene if they just want you to guard somebody who's handcuffed. Like just guard them and then pick their brain. Hey, how did you get to this unit? What do I need to do better? I don't know. Just man, I look back and I had a great career. You had great experiences. Now we get to share and teach that to other people. And that's like one of the best things I can say about retirement and technology is that using Instagram to connect, using, virtual classes. And so if you can kind of talk about some of that, like how you've been able to package and train and what all you're into.
Yeah. I mean, you hit so many good points. One of the like best things about going to a specialized unit is you're no longer necessarily dealing with like the lesser important things, right? Like you're not, when we were in street crimes, we did a lot of like drug arrests and stuff like that, just because it's just inherent. You pull cars over, you pull the right cars over, you get drugs. You're going to have a lot of the situations where it's, guy's got a bag of weed or whatever, and you write a civil citation, whatever it is. And like at some point that does get old, right? But once you then get to a unit to where like, whether it's whatever you're doing, apprehensions, warrants, robbery, now you're kind of at a different level where it's like, that's where I felt I was like, okay, we don't have to deal with like kind of the petty stuff. Now we're in like the big game, right? Everything was serious. Everything was like a felony. Like we weren't going out to look for the more petty stuff that, let's be honest, like it kind of sucks going out there and dealing with it a lot, because you get that. That's the sentiment you get from people. Like, hey, this doesn't matter. It's the classic, like, why don't you go lock up?
Yeah.
The guy's doing this or that or whatever. And it's like, all right, well, let me know where they are and like, let's do that. But no, it's a good point about kind of having one of those wins, right? Like if you don't have one of those wins, and again, everyone's different. I can tell you this, like having those, some of the best times I remember, or the most kind of like fulfilling days I had, were the days where it's like early in the day, you catch a good case and you literally like, that's all you do for the rest of the day. Like you spend the entire day going through evidence, doing interviews, stuff like that. You don't eat, you miss dinner, you end the night driving to jail, you're sweaty, like your uniform stinks, whatever. But like now you're sitting there, you drop the guy off at jail and you got a case file full of papers you got to organize tomorrow because you like made a great case. Like that to me, I was like, all right, this is a cool day. Like this is what it's about, right? That's just me personally. I thought like I lived for that stuff. And yeah, if you don't have those opportunities to like get those wins, especially early on, I mean, field training is so important. Beyond, like, we talk a lot about the police academy and stuff, but the police academy and what it serves, or what it needs to do, pales in comparison, in my opinion, to what a field training program should do. Because the police academy, again, it's all controlled. And until you get out there in the field and you start applying, what you've learned, you don't really get it. So, I think one of the, and it's been a talking point for a long time, which is like the age of like, what's a good age to go into law enforcement? I don't think there's a right answer. I think there's pros and cons for basically getting people younger, older, whatever it is. But I will say this, the lack of life experience that a lot of people bring into the job is difficult to handle, because if you've never grown up around an area where you might be patrolling, which is like a violent, heavy crime area, the way people live in those environments are different than the way you grow up in a rural, safer environment, right? Because for a lot of these guys, and even teenagers, right? They live in these areas that survival is a lifestyle. It's not like you being able to identify someone that may be carrying a weapon is not like a skill that you develop. It's like you have to know that, because that's part of your survival on a day-to-day basis. So the anxiety level that you have just living, going from school back and forth, being in school, sometimes a lot of these schools, there's a lot of not, bad things happening. If you haven't grown up in that environment, it's going to be really difficult for you to understand what that's like, to understand the behavior of people in those environments, to understand how to talk to people in those environments, unless you go out there and you just like immerse yourself in it. Like wherever you're working, you have to get out there and make the stops, like you said. you know, a lot of people in especially like interdiction type of training talk about how be very discerning on stops and, you know, only make stops that you have like, you know, significant like criminal behaviors that you're seeing. And I don't disagree with that, but early on in your career, you need to make a lot of stops. It doesn't matter what it's for. You need to make the stops for, you know, valid legal traffic violations, because you need to establish what is the normal person going to act like when I pull them over. Because until you've pulled over 1,000 people that aren't going to try to kill you, you're not going to understand or be able to identify the person that is based on the way they act compared to the people that aren't. Right. That's the baseline you have to develop. And especially if you're in an area like the area where I work patrol was, it was a heavy Central American Hispanic population. So it was a very unique area to work in. And I loved it. People that didn't start working there, if you sent them to that area, most of them hated it just because it was such a difficult place to work. I found it fascinating. But one of the things, and I'll give you an example of like something that I obviously didn't grow up with or understand at the time, was how much extortion was going on with these little food carts, the food trucks, the markets where, you know, extortion was a big thing for like the MS-13 and some of these local street gangs where there was a heavy presence there. And I would never, I drive by a food truck and never think like, oh, they might be a victim of extortion. But they were. And I would have never thought, hey, maybe I should go talk to the ladies that are running the food truck and maybe they could give me some good information. Once I learned that, and that was only through, again, listening to other officers who had experience working those gangs, working those types of cases, and who had debriefed members of those gangs and learned that stuff from them, where it's like, oh yeah, like extortion, that's a big thing. And we think of like the big things, like the big gangs, the big leaders. We don't think about the local, the kids who are kind of loosely affiliated with some gang, and they're going out there and they're sticking the, you know, food truck up for $100, right? We don't think about that until you get in that environment and you start understanding it. So stuff like that. I mean, I would like to say that agencies could do a better job of getting their officers engaged with those types of cases, right? Like if you see a go-getter, and I think it comes down to the supervisors, because I had some really good supervisors who saw kind of, I didn't even, when I first started, I had no interest in like plainclothes work. I didn't really know enough about it, right? It wasn't something that I had my eye on necessarily, but I had supervisors who had done that work. And in our agency, like that was the pinnacle. Like we had these teams that if you want to do work, like if you're a go-getter, like that's where you go. That's where the best work is. And I was fortunate that I had a lot of supervisors early on in my career that came from those units. And so they saw me and a couple of guys I work with who were like, all right, these guys are go-getters. They want to go out there, make stops, make arrests. Hey, go work with the plainclothes unit for a day. See what they do. See how they do it. Go to this plainclothes school that I'm going to send you to, because I think you're really going to enjoy it, right? You're going to learn a lot. And then from then on, it's like, okay, like this is awesome. This is where I want to be. But your supervisors have to like do their part in identifying the people that, hey, they have that persistence and they want to go out there and they want to do the work. Like, let's put them in a position to where they see like, hey, oh, this is what I can accomplish, because that's what makes all the work, like the patrol level work, the petty stuff. Yeah, I don't want to go out there and like be writing people tickets for like dime bags either, but you got to make those stops. You got to make those arrests. You got to write those citations. You got to build your resume. You have to get that experience so you then can go work like the robberies and the rapes and the homicides and the sex assaults and stuff like that. So it's like twofold, where as an individual, officers, like they come to me and I like, this is what you got to do. You got to do the work. Just keep putting in the work, learn things, go out there, make the stops. And then also hopefully as like supervisors, they get to that point and they start acting like a supervisor. They start identifying the people, you know, they're all stars, right?
Yeah.
Where they have these guys that are, hey man, I want to put these guys in a position where they're going to learn more and they're going to accomplish what we need them to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, we have an agency, a shift, a unit that like we need to have good people to recruit to put in those units. Sadly, I think in a lot of cases now you're seeing people that aren't interested in doing that type of work. And so you're going to see units that aren't as successful as they have been in the past, because you're not recruiting, you're not training, you're not putting people in the right position to be able to get to those roles and succeed. But yeah, I mean, for officers individually, like it's all about just doing the work and never stop doing the work. And some of the best cases come from calls for service. I mean, doing something proactive where it's like you're uncovering something that, whether it's a traffic stop, subject stop, like that's awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like I love that stuff too. But like when you are put in a position to like investigate a call for service, whether it's a burglary, a robbery, whatever it is, like you can solve that case or help solve that case. And that stuff matters, right? I've seen patrol officers, they just went all the way with a call. Whether it was they actually did a neighborhood canvas, they didn't like half-ass it or like check the box. They went and they talked to the neighbors and they got that information. They figured out what was going on and they presented that to a detective. And then next thing you know, they're sitting there writing search warrants and they're going on the raids with the search warrants with the detective, and they're going over evidence, and they have this big case that they were part of that they can put on their resume and say, hey, like I was part of this. Not only was I part of this, but I helped write 10 search warrants. So like you tell me to write a search warrant, I know exactly how to do it. There's a lot of people, I mean, they're not even going to know how to write a search warrant. And that's one of those things like people get freaked out about, where it's like, oh, I don't want to write a search warrant. I don't know how to do it. You go out there and you bang out 5 or 10 search warrants. It's like, all right, now I know exactly what to do. I know when to do it, how to do it, and what it needs to look like to get approved, and then further my case, right? So it's all about getting out there, getting uncomfortable, and just learning your environment, learning what's going on, just being, proactive about it. Not only just proactive in the sense of like proactive work, but like being proactive in your career development and your professional development.
Yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of people kind of want to jump to, oh, well, I want to be a whatever robbery detective, or I want to be a homicide detective, or, I want to be on this, DEA task force. I'll flip it and just be like, okay, but what is it that you're bringing to that team that they don't have? Like, why would you be the top pick? And if you start to think that way, you make your skills to where they have to say yes to you. And that was, I think, and that all depends on the person, but there were a lot of like really good officers, I think, that didn't understand that. They kind of thought like, but that's what I want. Okay, cool. But also see it from their perspective. Like when you either interview for that position or you put in a memo for it or whatever your process is, like imagine people sitting around, your decision maker sitting around and going, why would we not pick this person? Like they have now become whatever, they've written more search warrants than any of their peers that put in for this unit. Well, what is this unit about? It's about street crimes. So they're going to be doing search warrants. How many cases have gone to trial and have they had to testify? If their cases aren't going to trial, is that because the prosecutors are like, hell yeah, they write great reports. Their case jackets are solid. So when discovery is handed over, and this is for everybody listening that's in law enforcement, when that discovery gets handed over to a defense attorney and you got a career criminal looking through that case and the discovery with their defense attorney, how you write the report, how you document it, the information you have, is it organized? All of that matters. Because then that defense attorney is going to be like, you don't want to have to roll the dice. Or the word gets out too that, if someone's really good on the stand or they're just rock solid, defense attorneys are like, that's not who you want on the stand. And unfortunately for you, client, that's the charging officer, the charging detective. They know their stuff. You're dead to rights. It looks like you're going to get a deal of whatever, 2 years, 3 years in prison, or we roll the dice, go to trial. They got you on everything. They got a solid report, and that person knows how to testify. And, hey, defendants will be like, I don't care. I'm going to trial. And then they get sentenced to 15 years in prison or whatever. And prosecutors and defense attorneys talk about it. Hey, let me mention this too. This came up the other day in messaging. And this is one of the things I love about Instagram is like a post will go up or someone will share something with me and then it starts a conversation. So it's pretty cool. So I was messaging with this guy, great perspective because he's in the fire realm, so to speak, fire department stuff. But he had been on the jury during a murder trial. And this was years ago. And so he was just kind of sharing his experience with that. And I'd asked him, like, well, did the defense or did the detectives or the prosecutors talk to the juror the jurors after the trial.
Mm.
And he's like, no. It's like, man, like that's what we would do. That we had that option. I'm sure most states are that way, but once the trial's done, if you can do it in your jurisdiction and you're a detective or an officer, go talk. Sometimes the prosecutors will, set that up. You go sit in a room with them, and it's amazing feedback because they're citizens and they're like, you were speaking way over my head on whatever cell phone or, tracking devices. Like I had no clue what you were talking about.
That feedback that you were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I had one and the jurors were like, well, we had no clue there were gangs in our city. And like for this to be part of this, murder trial, like this was an eye opener for us. Even the judge wanted to talk afterwards, like, hey, I got a lot of questions about all the activity going on in the city that we apparently don't hear about. So for people, I'm just saying, like, it's great feedback. If you get your ass kicked in court and testifying, because it can happen, learn from it.
I want to say something about this too before we move on, because this is so important. One of the big mistakes I've seen cops make is the second they drop that bad guy off of jail, their case ends. And I would be in court 2 to 3 days a week for years. Usually it was like mine, traffic court or whatever, but you're in the courthouse with the same attorneys a few times a week, right? They are studying you. They know who you are. They know your names. They are paying attention to everything from how you show up. If you show up in your actual uniform, if your uniform looks sloppy, if you look sloppy, if you look like you hadn't slept all night, if you come with a case file, if you don't come with a case file, is your case file a pile of shit, right? They are paying attention to this. And the way you do those things on the minor cases are the same way that they're going to say on the major case, oh, I've seen this guy in court. He shows up, he stands out in the hallway, yapping with all the other cop buddies, acting kind of obnoxious. He doesn't ever come with a case file. Like I've never seen his name on like a major case. Like, yeah, we're gonna test this. We're gonna go to the prosecutor and we're gonna share that with the prosecutor and say, what do you got? That stuff. I'm like, the reputation does not stay within the police department. It spreads to the courtroom. And if you want to be successful, like that stuff is going to matter. And it's the prosecutors. The prosecutors don't want to prosecute a case with someone that they know is like not going to show up with a good case file. All these things matter. And I'm guaranteed there's going to be cops listening to this that are the one cop out of like their group of cops, or the guys that they hang with or they're at court with or whatever, that is, everyone's going to be like, nah, it doesn't matter. Like, who cares? Let's get our time or whatever. I promise you that stuff, if you do those basics and you are the one cop that comes, prepared to testify, whether it's a DUI trial, a traffic case, whatever it is, be prepared to testify, have your notes in order, have a good case file, whether it's a small report, big report, like be prepared. That's going to serve you so much in the long run. I would do, even when like I would put in for a special assignment, actually like an outline of your resume, like the casework you've done. And I would always add after like each case example, like what was the outcome? Like, did the defendant plead guilty? A lot of them were like guilty pleas, right? Or they got 10 years or whatever. And again, like I get, like, we don't control the criminal justice system. Like there's wonky courts, there's things that happen that shouldn't happen. But in general, like if you're making good cases, most of your cases are going to get guilty pleas. And so that's a small but like impactful thing that not only should you be paying attention to, because it's going to be feedback, like we just talked about, feedback to like, where are you missing? Like what in your case is missing to where like either a prosecutor decides to drop it, maybe it goes to a jury trial and you lose. Like those things happen, but is there something that you can do better to have a better case? But also, like, if the defense attorney opens that case file up and they start looking through the evidence, and pretty quickly they're like, all right, what offers do you have? Like, let's plead guilty to this, because we know I don't want to go to trial on this. This case is like, not only is the case good, the report's written well, the evidence looks good, this officer looks squared away, I don't even want to try it. And that stuff happens so often, and prosecutors remember that. And again, like, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So yeah, I get it. Like, do you need to put together a full case jacket for a DUI? No. But if you want to work robberies in the future, like, Just start doing that same thing now. Like, have things organized. That was one of the things when I worked street crimes. Like, one of the things that my supervisor had us do was everything had a case file. It was organized. It had a date. It had all the evidence in it. Everything was well put together. You know, even like little things like making sure it's you have like those little holes in it so you can put it, you know, you can fold it over. It looks good. Like, you can flip through it. Simple stuff like that, instead of like taking a manila folder and just throwing a bunch of papers in it. That type of stuff is what's going to make you stand out. And it's also going to, like, I think in a lot of cases, it makes you feel more professional. And like, when you feel more professional, you do a more professional job. Like, that stuff matters. So all to say, like, we could go down such a, we could have another like hours worth of conversation about just how to act in court and the different things that, like you said, jurors are paying attention to. Like, if you can get that feedback, and I mean, that's something I had never even thought of, which is like, go talk to the jurors and see what they thought about this. Even the way you explained, and it's the same thing that you could even share with like a prosecutor, because I'm sure that, you know, we have a lot of young prosecutors out there that are probably not aware of the same things, and they should be going out to the jurors and asking the same questions and saying, hey, like, what part was there evidence here that you didn't understand? Were there terms that we use that you didn't get? What swayed you, or what kind of, you know, jumped out to you that, like, I don't get this and I'm not following along? If you're a police officer that's then going to the prosecutor and saying, hey, like, this is something that I've seen in another case work well, or this piece of evidence like went over well with the jury. They seem to understand it. When I was talking to them, I could see that they were like nodding their head, or they were like following along. All these little things, these details, like, matter, especially when you start getting to the big cases. If you want to work those homicides and the robberies and the rapes and stuff, like, that's going to make the difference between a trial that goes your way and doesn't go your way, right? In a lot of cases.
And it makes those larger cases 10 times easier to manage and to work to where you can, I mean, it's going to be stressful, but if you're doing it right, you feel like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, you're in the zone, like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And, you know, whether it's in an interview room, like, that's where I felt probably the most comfortable. I felt fine on the street too, but it was like, man, in interview or any kind of interview environment, I really, really felt at home. But that was also because of so many years of experience on the street, you know, dealing with people day in and day out. And like you were saying, like, baselines and understanding what to look for. But when it came to prosecutors and, you know, stepping up that game, I was on a district team, basically like a street crimes team, but it was a rotation. So that usually you do like a 60-day rotation. And at the time we had 6 squads that rotated for our district, and our district was the most violent. You know, we had most of the crime was kind of in that area. But the cool thing about it was, like, early on in my career working those teams, the sergeant usually was the most knowledgeable about street crime stuff. So usually their background would be like from a drugs and vice unit or DEA task force, that sort of thing. And so I was fortunate to learn a lot from the sergeants and some of the senior members, but it was also like the sergeant's running the team, so he's going to pick and choose the hard charges from each squad, and then you just kind of like work as like an all-star team or whatever. But one of the things I learned early on then was basically creating a Word document for me to be able to remember a mugshot and then basically the background of the person, and to understand, hey, this is a single crack rock, you know, that was in his pocket. More than likely he was going to sell. This wasn't necessarily a sell case. This was just simple possession of crack cocaine or whatever. However, what's the background? This guy is a gang member. He's been a suspect in like 2 stabbings in the area. The whole neighborhood basically calls 911 every time he's out on the block because they know somebody's going to get beat up. Where it's like he has a lot more going on than just this one crack rock in his pocket. And so then when I could brief a prosecutor on that and say, and I was a patrol officer, so it'd be like, you know, these cases are coming in, and the prosecutor's understanding, like, just understand that our unit is going after very low level stuff, but can we put a little effort into this case? So that's where I learned a lot of prosecutors would say, okay, you don't have anything on video. You basically have an investigative stop. It was based on this. Like, it's not the best case in the world. Okay, well, how could I have made it better? And that was their argument at the time. I was like, get it on video. Like, okay. So now you do have to take further steps. And so then, as I went to a different unit that was completely plain clothes, I was the detective drug unit. We started figuring out different ways to use different angles of cameras, vehicles, on person, all of that. And I don't want to give away to tradecraft, but I will say I got frustrated at one point and I was like, why are we doing the same freaking thing over and over, to the point where the dealers see the discovery, they know the camera angles. We have to change it up. This is how I'm going to rig up my stuff when we use my informant. And so then everybody's, oh, that's pretty cool. Let's do that. And I won't give away the secret, but it was cool in that sense. You get a little more creativity, but also don't just do the same thing over and over and over. But the key, I will say, just that with prosecutors and picking their brain, and then as you gain experience, and this is especially for people who are listening or in leadership position, if you, and I know people are going to get mad at me, I'm going to tell you right now, though, if you're a sergeant or above and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, we really want you to be whatever, the sergeant of this team, and you have no idea how that works, and you've never really worked that as a patrol officer or as a detective, then fight for yourself and say, no, I don't think that's the best for the department, because I don't have those skills. And there are much better leaders, say, like, DWI squad. Yeah, pick somebody else, or even have 2 or 3, people. Hey, pick Sergeant so-and-so, so-and-so. They're incredible with DWIs. Do not put me over there, because I don't know anything about DWIs, and I'm only going to frustrate the officers. There's this idea sometimes in different police departments that a supervisor is just there to supervise, and that the officers and detectives are the experts and they know what they're doing. Well, now we see through these trends that power vacuum, or that vacuum of knowledge happens. And now you've got sergeants with no background, and I'm picking on DWI, but pick it, a sergeant for a DWI squad who's never, like me, I've never done a DWI arrest. So, but I had been asked at one point to be a leader in a whole different division that I had never really been a part of. And in assignments that I had nothing to do with. And I was told, oh, well, this is good for your career development. I was like, but I'm not selfish in that way. Flip it. Like, I'm not selfish. I'm not worried about my career. I think I best serve the needs of the department staying in violent crimes. I'm a gang expert. I work gangs. I work homicide, aggravated assault. Like, this is my world. I will do nothing but frustrate people over there. And to this day, it still bothers me, because I think that was pushed from people, probably because they wanted someone who was easy to get along with, which I'm easy to get along with. But that's, to me, that's crazy. Like, it's very frustrating in that sense. Like, I want to go to a supervisor. If I'm a sergeant, I want my lieutenant to be more knowledgeable than I am. And sometimes that can't be the case, but I was fortunate in the violent crimes section to have 2 different lieutenants at 2 different times that were incredible. And then one lieutenant went to captain. Same thing, like that dude, when I was a rookie, he was on a street crimes unit. One of the first times I met him, we were chasing people all through this area. They were all bailing out of stolen cars. Like, the dude was just always a hard charger and moved up the ranks. And so at one point, he and I were in the violent crime section. I'm a homicide sergeant. He's a lieutenant. Then he makes captain. And then I make lieutenant. I take his spot. He goes, that's the way it should work. And that was like one of the things when I retired. It was like my exit interview. Hey, keep knowledge within stuff. Like, do not start moving people around. You're frustrating people, and build on that. And so when detectives come in, they hone their skills. And my homicide detectives were incredible. So it wasn't like I'm sitting there teaching them stuff every day. But if there was something that I could show them, then I at least had that background, or I had enough working knowledge to be like, I'm going to get out of y'all's way, which was 90% of the time. Like, go to work, do your thing. I'm right here. I'll fly, air cover and keep higher ups from asking stupid questions. But like, I went off on a tangent, but people listening, there are people who've got 4 or 5 years on and they're now sergeants. And it's like, hey, stick in your realm if you can, and fight for it, and be able to articulate and flip it when higher ups pitch that stuff. Because it's lunacy. I mean, I don't know. I could be completely wrong. I'm not because I have sat in meetings before, and there are people that don't want the assignment they get as a leader
Yeah.
because they don't feel comfortable in it, and then they're forced into it, and they're told crap like that, like, oh, it's good career development, and they're trying not to rock the boat either, or they're trying to help out.
Yeah.
People are like, okay, but that is, to me, I think that's one of the worst trends in police work. And promote the hard chargers and encourage people to do just like we're talking about, like, look at your next step, learn from everybody you can, the prosecutors. If you get a chance, like I was fortunate in my city, my first chief was very hands-on. She was former NYPD commander or division, however they break it down, but she's in charge of a very large section of NYPD. But man, she would go right up to a patrol officer and be like, officer, whatever, so and so, I heard about that use of force in that car chase with that robbery suspect. That's good work. Like, I expect more of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she would also ask you your input. Hey, what do you think we can do better in your district? Or, hey, are you aware that there were 29 homicides in your district and there was only 33 citywide, but there's 29 in your district? Why do you think that is? Like, I love that. Like, I thought, man, like that, because I didn't get hired to be a cop. No one gets hired to be a cop because we're stupid robots.
Yeah.
Like, we're hired to be like armed problem solvers.
Yeah.
And I always loved that aspect. And that was her push in our department to get us kind of up to speed, was like, go your career path. If you want homicide down the road and you want violent crimes, you focus on that, and that's your career path. We don't need to be deviating and putting you somewhere else that you're not comfortable with. Like, I love that. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah.
I went off on a tangent. Sorry about that. You're the guest.
No, I like that. I love like kind of the things you just talked about that she did. I think those are super powerful. I mean, even when I was in the corporate sector, I had some really good supervisors, and at one point, I would have weekly calls with my direct supervisor just to like go over things, ask questions. He would share his input. I would get advice from him, stuff like that. And yeah, it's not always practical, but we do far too little of that type of engagement, I think. Like I said, I had some really good supervisors. I was just fortunate. I worked in the busiest district in our county, and that's where everyone wanted to be if they wanted to do work. So a lot of those supervisors that went and did the work, they came back when they got promoted and they got sent to that same district, learned a lot from them. I mean, it's just being able to kind of like, and I like the questions that you were just talking about that she would ask, because it's, police work is like you said, you have to be able to think for yourself, and you have to be able to apply critical thinking, and you have to be able to kind of think outside the box in a lot of ways too. And when I went to work in the surveillance unit, it was difficult. Like, surveillance is the most difficult thing I've ever done. Also, probably my favorite thing I've ever done. But it's really challenging to learn it. And luckily, I had a supervisor who was extremely experienced, and I was around other guys on the team that were extremely experienced. But I know that there were people that, kind of, this is in contrast to what you were just talking about. There were people that put in to be a supervisor on that unit that had no surveillance experience. And luckily they didn't get those roles. But it's like, you got to ask yourself, hey, like, if you're going to lead a team in something you have no experience in. And not only that, but this is a team that has, some of the people on the team have more years of a police experience period than you do. How are you going to lead them right now? I get like you were just kind of moving puzzles around in terms of like personnel and stuff, but I've had plenty of conversations with command staff that their go-to is that argument, which is like, we need bodies, we need people here, we need people there. I mean, I get it, but there's different ways to kind of approach it, right? And again, like, if people aren't interested in DUIs or DWIs, like, why put them in a unit that's all they do? It makes no sense to me. I get like there has to be a supervisor over certain units, but I think that also goes to like, are we taking like our professional development seriously? Like, are we allowing officers to kind of find their groove and then putting them in a position to at least have the opportunity to kind of pursue that and achieve that, probably not as well as we need to be doing.
Yeah, and the whole reason I even brought that up is like the cool thing about doing a podcast like this is there are people who hold very high ranks that listen to the show. And they're most of them are probably like very squared away and they're doing all the right things.
Yeah.
And then there are, people who are maybe sergeants, lieutenants, and because of the trend, in the last few years, people are getting promoted way ahead of their experience or even their level to supervise. That's the other thing. Like just to be a patrol sergeant and you haven't fully mastered patrol skills. Now you're a sergeant and you don't feel confident and you're out there, the officers are going to see that, or your reputation is that person's like a bookworm, but I've seen them on the street and they're a cluster. I heard guys talking on the block one day and a sergeant who had been brought from another district had been brought in, and all we were doing was working a special assignment, and me and another guy, it was like basically they pulled two of us, one from each squad, and they were like, you do nothing for 10 hours except hammer this area, then drive to this one, then drive it, like just arrest people. I don't care. And literally we would pull up and dudes would just stand in the middle of the street and like bow up on us. We'd jump out and arrest them for impeding the flow of traffic. You're like, just, or like one dude balls up a pack of cigarettes, throws it right down in front of us. We get out. I'll say, hey man, you got to pick that up. You can't just throw trash in the street. That's littering. And he's like, fuck you. It's like, okay, so now you're refusing to pick up the trash, and then charge them. Stupid stuff like that. But the whole idea was we have to have a presence, and everybody has to know you're the nuisance. You need to go somewhere while we're out there. But a sergeant was brought in from another district to kind of check on us throughout the day. And she pulls up and goes to get out of the car. And it was like, you could tell it looked like somebody walking on another planet. Completely uncomfortable, looking around, to the point where even the dudes on the corner is like base. And I won't cuss it up, but they were like, yo, who the F is this person? Like what? And everything is like, looks brand new. And at that time, the sergeant had on those old chloroform, whatever they're called, the shiny shoes, we all wore boots, because we're in and out of nasty areas. So the guys like look and see what we wear, and they notice like we don't have whistle chains hanging and stuff, like just stuff like that person was already set up for failure. And for whatever reason, because they pulled that person from another district, came in and it was a disaster and it was a mess. And I hated going out there every day because whatever we got into, and we got into uses of force, we got into foot pursuits, that sergeant who had no rapport with us or anything, didn't really care to build any rapport. That's who was signing off on stuff. And I say all that just to say like when people get promoted or they do a process and they get promoted to like sergeant off of patrol because they tested well or whatever this process is, all like if their reputation is horrible as a patrol officer, they're going to be ineffective as a sergeant. I mean, it just carries over. So there is also that trend out there of police departments hiring outside organizations and companies to do their interviewing and promoting, which I get it. I know all it is it comes down to a cost thing, and cities don't want to pay for the complaints, but I have seen it be very disastrous on many levels of your process here with this private company is sometimes promoting sometimes the worst applicants. And it's not fair to them either. You're putting stress on them. And now they're a sergeant or a lieutenant or whatever, and they really don't feel comfortable in doing the job as a patrol officer. And now they're responsible for 5 or 10 or however many 15 officers who are out there who want to go get into stuff. And instinctively, these leaders are, hey, maybe you need to sit in a parking lot, or second guessing everything they do. And I got stories over stories, but just for those listeners, like if you're feeling stressed as a supervisor because you don't know that background and you do find yourself in an assignment that's not your specialty, get some training, pick the brain of the officers. Like you got to do something. You can't just sit back and be weak.
Yeah, I think the quickest way to lose a shift or a unit is by We hear it all the time. Like so and so got promoted to this unit, they have no idea what they're doing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're not only losing them in terms of like the trust, but then when those officers have questions about, hey, what do I do with this investigation? Should I write a search warrant? And you have no idea, right? Because you just don't have that information. Oh, like where are they going to go? And so I mean, you hear it all the time. I'm sure everyone listening to this that's a cop or has been a cop has seen someone get promoted that shouldn't have been promoted or put over a unit that they had no experience in, and it's just like you kind of lose it to how long does it take that unit to kind of recover too,
Mm-hmm.
where you all right, like how long do we have to deal with this person? And it's unfortunate, but part of it I guess does go to like, why are we promoting people that haven't at least earned the experience of like being if you're going to be a patrol sergeant, for example, like you should be a really good patrol officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think more than anything, we probably have a lot of people that are patrol sergeants that weren't even good patrol cops. So it's like there, you've kind of screwed yourself. And then when you talk again, like you talk about like specific assignments where you're above a specific unit where they're in charge of, like, if you're going to go in there without the experience, like one, you have to recognize that, and you got to figure out how you're going to, build that experience up. Right. Whether it's going to the most experienced people on the team and learning very quickly yourself, or like you said, maybe trying to kind of, move yourself to a different unit, or at least politic to not go to the unit that they're trying to send you to. I mean, so many bad things that can happen, I think, in those scenarios.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, tell me about any specific courses out there, because people listening are going to be like, man, y'all yap a whole lot about training, but where do I go to get it?
Yeah. Policepost.com, policeposts.com. We have a handful of really good training courses online. They're on demand. So, you can get them immediately as long as once you verify your LEO credentials, get access to it. You have a tremendous course called Building the Machine, all about gang intel and operations. It's fantastic. I've basically gone through it myself. It's great information, all that stuff. Again, like our kind of goal was to help fill some of this training and knowledge gap, put information out there that's available immediately on demand. You don't have to travel to a course. You don't have to wait for someone, an instructor to bring a course to you. We understand like that's not always practical. It's not always, a lot of people in areas where they don't get a lot of good training throughout the year. So this is our kind of way of trying to supplement that, give some of the information. I mean, beyond that, you can, I answer DMs all day long. Like the DMs at Survive Policing, they're open all the time. I answer questions constantly. Anything. I love talking about, investigations, police work, same stuff we've been talking about. So I'm open to have those discussions, share whatever information I can to whoever wants it. Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to connect with me.
Good deal. Any new music that you're digging, or any old music that you're playing like on a constant rotation?
Oh, that's a good question. The new Deftones album, I've been listening to quite a bit. They were one of those like first bands when I was in probably middle school that first came out in the 90s. I was like, all right, this is really good. Man, they're a good one. Let me think of some others. So I've been going back to kind of like the early 2000s. So like in the early 2000s, I went to when I was in middle school in like the late 90s. It was a lot of the new metal stuff, and then it kind of transitioned to like the early 2000s. Shadows Fall is a really good one. Like some of that early 2000s stuff I really love. I'm all over the place with music. It's really like I'll listen to hip hop, heavy metal, country sometimes, not as much as I used to, but yeah. Some I get into some punk. It just depends. Like I have a good friend. He's a big Less Than Jake fan, so I've been kind of into them. They're good. They're more like the poppy kind of punk, but they got some good jams. Yeah, the new Deftones album is really good. Anything that kind of like from that era, I'll usually put on every once in a while, and then kind of like that early 2000s stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think Deftones is probably sort of like one of those universal bands.
Yeah.
It's like that's one of the things that there was a guest. He's Jason Kramer's a DJ out in LA, and that's what we were talking about, was that Deftones album coming out, and just and of course, like their influence from Bad Brains and other bands and
Yeah.
stuff. But I would, you're right. Like Deftones, it's sort of like
They're always
Motorhead
cool.
too. Yeah. And I think like I can't even remember what year it was. I want to say probably like 98, like right around the time they were really starting to kind of take off that Adrenaline or whatever album. I can't remember now which one it was, but I saw them with a band called Quicksand, if I remember right. But my brother put me on Deftones. He's like, dude, like you're gonna dig this. And I remember it was the cassette tape. That's why I say I'm bad with like titles sometimes of album covers, but or album names. Yeah, I dig Deftones, but I remember Korn being like huge around that
Korn
time.
was really big.
Yeah, and like they went on tour, if I remember right, with Sick of It All, which is like still one of my favorite hardcore bands. They still put out albums. They still do shows for like 30 years. Absolutely incredible, high energy. But like if I'm not mistaken, they toured with Korn, and that was like one of the first times I kind of remember hearing about them. Same thing. My brother was like, dude, like get that Korn tape, man. I was like, Korn.
I'll even go look. I'll listen to like the first couple Korn albums, and it is wild. Like it's such a distinct sound. Even like 30 years later, it's pretty wild. I'll even go. I go back. I'll listen to like Rage Against the Machine and stuff like that. Just great music. A lot of like wild political stuff on there, which is just kind of, it's funny to kind of look back, kind of to see that stuff and kind of their journey. But like the music's great.
I've often said that like Rage's sound is absolutely incredible, unique. It's kind of, I don't know, like the spirit of Public Enemy, and then just like the complete unique sound of who knows, we'll pick whatever category between metal and punk and hip hop. But same thing, like, politics aside, and that's the beauty of music, is I don't have to agree with everything. Hell, I was listening to Dead Kennedys this morning. I still listen to Dead Kennedys, and even in my brain, I'm just kind of sitting there like, man, I still love this sound. It's nostalgic for me. Obviously, I don't have to agree with everything they're saying, but growing up listening to that and teaching me to question everything was like, it was pretty cool to be able to stay kind of ahead of the power curve when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were like, hey, the news is manipulating and the news is all about profit. Like, like Dead Kennedys were telling me that when I was like 10 years old. But so there's I know like you don't dig punk, but there's a band called Toxic Energy Band, and they're out in California. And so their guitarist was on the show, Brent Watersworth, firefighter. He's also in another band, Taking Days. But they're kind of like Toxic Energy's like that stripped down old school punk sound to me. Not like Less Than Jake or like the pop ska kind of stuff. But like that heavy energy. So I've been digging that quite a bit lately. And it's tough because all these great shows are going on in California and like these festivals and stuff. And it's like Mike McCulloughan, who's the original lead singer of Dropkick Murphys. So he's on the first album, Do or Die. And then he left the band to be a Boston firefighter, and Al Barr took over, and Al Barr was with them for I don't know how many records. But now Mike's out there in California playing this, or recently played this festival. But it was like Street Dogs, his other band, played a set, and then he also plays with Michael McCulloughan and the Bomb Squad, and they but they play Do or Die, that first Dropkick Murphys album. And so if people are listening and they're like, okay, Dropkick Murphys, like you go back and listen to Do or Die. And I used to wake up the Army barracks. Like I was in infantry, and I would crank it in the morning, like, 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it was. Like I would crank Do or Die. And not taking away from anything from Al Barr or Dropkick, albums later. I loved, the next 2 or 3 after that I bought. But there was something about that Do or Die and that sound. And then anybody who doesn't know about Street Dogs, like they've got probably about 4 or 5 albums out, I think. I mean, incredible. But I mean, here you got a guy who was Boston firefighter. He had been in the Army before all that. I think he had deployed during Desert Storm, like 1991. But just always loved music and always loved punk, and was part of, 2 incredible bands, that I love. And I had him on the show. It was great talking to him and like getting the perspective from him about the power of music, the power of kind of changing your mindset and being positive, the power of sobriety and stuff. So I don't know. I dig all that. And then there is, I always got to throw out Billy Bats and the Made Men. They're young guys, but gosh, like when they play, to me, it's that punk from when I was a kid. So not everybody's a punk fan, but if you're going to listen to it, that's it. And then on the lighter side, I say lighter, but like I listen to everything to, like you said, country. Like I've gone back and my wife and I, she's from near the Nashville area, and love 90s country. And I'm like, oh gosh, country. Like I don't mind little Johnny Cash. And then we're sitting around playing Yahtzee one night, and we started listening to just random songs, and a bunch of 90s country starts playing, and I remembered like all of it because I was stationed near Nashville. Anyway, so I love like old Brooks and Dunn and stuff, man. I'll get into it. But there's also a cat named Jesse Stockton that we seen play quite a bit. Just an incredible guy. I throw it out there a lot, but if people dig just incredible musician, songwriter, it's not punk, it's not hardcore or anything. If anything, I would probably say, I don't know, man, just kind of like some laid back music. Check it out there. Jesse Stockton. I think he's got like 3 albums out, and he's got a new one that he's working on right now. But I don't know, great guy. So I always like talking music. I always like picking people's brains. And you put a large variety of music to like clips and stuff on Instagram.
I do.
So that's what,
Yeah, I do. I put I'll put like a lot of hip hop, a lot of like new metal stuff. I mean, again, my taste is like all over the place. But yeah, and it's funny because it does kind of, I think there is something to, and we've talked about this before, just kind of being like, not, you don't have to go in law enforcement when we think about like cops and like even the military, like robots and like stuff like that. Man, we're all like, we have different tastes, dude. I've hung with lots of different people, listen to a lot of different music, been around a lot of different people. I mean, and if you can get in, if you have an interest in like different music, whatever it is, like culture, I mean, even out where I am, I mean, you go to, down to DC, like DC has it has its own music scene. Right. And we used to, sometimes we pull over some of these, guys that were like big in the scene. Wouldn't be known like national, but like even if you kind of like know who these guys are, you kind of listen to music, like you can understand the culture and the environment through that. But yeah, dude, I mean, sometimes I'll get I'll put on like Nas like nonstop, or I like Nipsey Hussle. He's like one of the guys I'm into. Wu-Tang Clan, they have a new album out, which is it's kind of a throwback. But yeah, Jay-Z, Tupac, Biggie, like all that stuff, just kind of that 90s era. It just depends on the mood, but yeah, it's all, love all that stuff.
Good deal. Well, look, man, I appreciate your time. Everybody knows how to reach out to you. You're always good about answering DMs and stuff and sharing your knowledge and information. So I appreciate your time, buddy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this. It's always a great conversation with you. And anytime at Survive Policing, send me a DM if you got questions, want to reach out, say hi, whatever. Yeah, I'm always available.
Perfect. Disruptors out.